Just because the sport is called mixed martial arts, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need all of them to succeed. And while it might not be 100% accurate to call these fighters entirely one-dimensional, that hasn't stopped them from building their success off of one key element of their game. Now, without further ado, and ranked in no particular order, these are some of the biggest one-trick ponies in MMA. Number 10. Derrick Lewis. Look, having one major path to victory isn't always a bad thing, especially when that path is the great equalizer, punching power. And for UFC heavyweight Derrick Lewis, no matter how badly beaten or outclassed he's looking, that power is always in play. Just look at his fight with Alexander Volkov, where Lewis was getting beaten for the vast majority of the fight. But with less than 20 seconds on the clock, Lewis connected with a massive right hand, finding his mark in the final seconds of a losing effort. Something similar happened against Curtis Blaydes as well, where it seemed like we were all focused on the clear improvements being shown by his opponent, until Derrick Lewis unloaded a massive uppercut, ending the fight there and then.
These guys have been on each other's radar for quite a while. Big right! Lewis does it again!
This isn't to say that Lewis doesn't have other skills, but when you sign on the dotted line to take on this longtime heavyweight contender, you're not exactly worrying about his takedowns.
My goals now, I probably try to get the most submissions in UFC history.
Number 9. Rousimar Paul Harris. Rousimar Paul Harris is known for two things, and only one of them is in any way useful. The first and most important tool in Paul Harris's arsenal is his excellent use of knee bars and heel hooks. You can always expect to see him catch a leg or two whenever he fights, and over the years, he has certainly become one of the premier technicians in the sport when it comes to leg locks. The second thing that he's famous for is his tendency to hold on to these submissions long after the tap is forced.
He rolls out the Kimura, but this is it! It's all over! And once again, Paul Harris maintains the hold. Clearly the tap was coming, and the corner of Jake Shields, they are furious.
This has gained Rousimar a reputation as a dirty fighter, and it's a reputation that is unfortunately deserved. Sure, he's a skilled grappler, but his billing never really moves away from these two major characteristics. And of those two, only one of them is actually useful in a fight. Number 8. Hoist Gracie. Is it fair to call Hoist Gracie one-dimensional just because he was facing people who weren't familiar with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or how to defeat it? Well, in the earliest stages of his career in particular, Hoist Gracie would poke away with a sharp leg kick before quickly closing the distance and moving into a submission. He did this time and time again under the UFC banner before he eventually left, and during those initial tournament runs, his fights typically ended the same way. It wasn't a case of if Hoist would shoot for a takedown, it was when he would do it. A trailblazing force within the MMA world and someone who inspired an entire generation to take up martial arts. But even for his time, he had a very linear path to victory, and that's what made him special. Later in his career, the well-rounded Matt Hughes would eventually overcome this style, but there's no denying that Hoist Gracie's place on MMA's Mount Rushmore is set in stone. Number 7. Cody McKenzie. Cody McKenzie might not be a name that is immediately familiar to newer fans of the sport, but in his best years, he was the king of the guillotine choke. In fact, his modified version of the technique was so well refined, he even renamed it the McKenzie-tine. Out of his 17 career wins, 15 have come by submission, including a 10-fight win streak of all guillotine chokes that led him to the UFC. After landing in the promotion, his one-dimensional approach would cost him, and he reached a downturn in form that he never recovered from. But on the back of his mastery of the modified guillotine, he definitely occupies a special place in MMA history. Of that, there can be little doubt. Number 6. Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson is enough of a legend in this sport that it's hard to be too critical, or even outright call him a one-trick pony. But when so much of your game is centered around a single punch, and that punch has its own name, Hendo's H-bomb definitely earned him a spot on this list. Sure, he's a credentialed wrestler with a background in Greco-Roman and freestyle wrestling, and also has a left hand that was pretty formidable. But Henderson's right hand was undoubtedly his go-to punch, and as a singular weapon, it left a mark on MMA history that few shots can match. Just ask Michael Bisping, who fell victim to perhaps the most perfect one-shot knockout in the history of the UFC, or at least it was, until Francis Ngannou finished Alistair Overeem at UFC 218. Number 5. Paul Daley. Paul Daley might have screwed up his UFC run by sucker-punching Josh Koscheck, receiving a lifetime ban from the promotion, but these days, it's pretty fair to say that he occupies a well-respected place in the hearts of the MMA fanbase. Sure, his grappling and wrestling have never been the best, but his left hook is quite possibly the most devastating shot in welterweight history. And while we have seen him dish out some serious punishment with his other limbs, that left hand established him as one of the most fearsome knockout artists in the game. But take that punch away, and you have a fairly beatable fighter. There's no denying his highlight reel, but for our money, Daley leans a little bit too heavily on his signature shot. Number 4. Ben Askren. Ben Askren is a one-trick pony in terms of his path to victory, and in terms of the style he used. However, in the world of wrestling, that couldn't be any further from the truth. But this is mixed martial arts, and relying on just one discipline can leave other areas lacking, like his striking, for example, which has been the subject of criticism for quite some time. Nowadays, some people do tend to forget just how great he was in his prime, and how he weaponized his wrestling game to have an unbeaten career, before eventually crossing over to the UFC. But this approach can only take you so far, and once he arrived in his new promotion, the competition was able to work around this, leading to a pretty disastrous UFC run. Number 3. Ronda Rousey. People used to really think that Ronda Rousey was the complete package, a fighter whose striking game was just as formidable as her stellar grappling. Sadly, that opinion has aged like milk. Outclassed by Holly Holm in every exchange at UFC 193, her lack of advanced footwork and head movement made her a sitting duck for the boxing prodigy. And looking back over Ronda Rousey's career, her successes, though remarkable, generally came from a judo toss into an armbar.
They also call you, and I'm going to say, I don't want to look at you when I say this, but they call you the arm collector.
Adept at locking onto her favorite submission from anywhere, Rousey was the armbar queen, with 9 of her 11 wins coming by that very submission. And at the time, the bantamweight division had no answer for it. However, when they did finally catch up, Rousey's shortcomings were made painfully clear to the world. Number 2. Chael Sonnen. Undefeated, undisputed, and never even lost a round. Well, if Chael Sonnen had his own way, his 49-fight career would read as a cool 49-0. But as we all know, Sonnen didn't always have it his own way in the cage. And on many different occasions, Chael was made to look extremely one-dimensional. His high-pressure wrestling and heavy top control were his bread and butter during his prime. And while, sure, the takedown threat offered up pathways to success on the feet, Chael's go-to move generally involved shooting for a double leg and then maintaining his top position.
Quick left-right combinations, and there he goes, the wrestler, Chael Sonnen. That's it, man. That's what he does.
And again, Sonnen exploding for the takedown.
His dominance in wrestling earned him several notable wins. And sure, he didn't quite manage to capture UFC gold during his best years, but few fighters have ever come quite as close without making the final hurdle. A limited fighter to some degree, but a legend nonetheless. Number 1. Mark Hunt. Can we call a walk-off KO a trick? Well, either way, when you sign on the dotted line to take on the legendary Mark Hunt, you're not exactly going to focus on your grappling during camp, especially when considering that he has 0 submission wins. Hunt's massive punching power was without question his biggest asset in the firefight. As a respected kickboxer, he has the fundamentals to really round out his overall striking skill set. But apart from his granite chin, the first thing that springs to mind when Mark Hunt's name is mentioned is, of course, his devastating power. On many occasions, Hunt has finished some of the sport's most durable fighters. And even in his recent retirement fight with Sonny Bill Williams, he proved that power is truly the last thing to go. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Apart from that, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.